And I have decided to put a little string of writing tips together for you to watch. My first big tip relates to the resources you use in your papers. But one of the things that I thought of as I was cooking dinner for my son is that the sources you use are a lot like the ingredients you choose when you're going to cook something. And so the tip that I have is to think about your ingredients. And so let's get going and let's cook up a paper and see how this goes. So I was thinking about a lot of your papers and how you get assignments that say use a certain amount of sources or make sure that you cite class materials. And one of the big problems that comes up, I think, is related to the ingredients that you all decide to use. And so I think it's kind of analogous to making a hamburger. So if you're making a hamburger, it kind of makes sense that you're going to use some of the meatier things like the hamburger bun, the patties. I got some turkey patties here, and I got some buns here. And the buns can also serve as a metaphor for an introduction and a conclusion, but that's a whole other story. Now, when you all start to write your paper, you're like, oh, cool, I need to cite 3 sources. And so you go to the library or the course materials that have been assigned, and you grab your 3 sources. You grab mustard, and then you grab ketchup, and then you grab a pickle. And then what you do is you end up using these as your paper ingredients, right? You're like, yay, I cited 3 sources. I should get an A. And when you put it all together, you end up with this thing. You can't even see the mustard on it, but it doesn't look very good, does it? And you see how that's just not as good as using some of the more substantive sources? Oh man. Okay. So as we think about this, we can kind of think about writing a paper like cooking something. So you're kind of cooking up a paper, and you want these things to come out okay. And a lot of you are using the same ingredients but coming up with totally different papers. I think of it as a burger, right? And so this is what you could make over here, right? This has a lot of cool ingredients and they all seem to be in the right order. Now, as I showed you in the video, there was a student that chose a pickle, mustard, and ketchup because they were probably the shortest and easiest readings that were assigned. And so this could kind of work out if you have a lot of times discussion forums or something like that. You'll have like 4 readings, but one of them is way shorter than the other one, and so you end up using that one. That is why that post just isn't as good as other posts, right? Even though you technically, yes, you used 3 sources. I think you can also think about this in terms of if your professor assigns something that is really meaty, like there's maybe a 30-page article along with 2 5-page articles or something like that, you could think, well, that must mean that 30-page article is important, because we actually do think a lot about what sources we put out there, and we do think about the length of the sources themselves as well. Sometimes there could be like a key point that's missing, and that's why we include another source that might be shorter, but you get the idea. There's other ways you can think about this too, right? You have a lot of different ingredients at your disposal. How you put them together influences what this burger is going to taste like. And using the right ingredients in the right order also kind of matters as well. So pickle, mustard, ketchup, yum, not so much, right? And so let's see how we can make a better one. So one thing to think about is the ingredients are basically your citations. And when I lived in Eugene, Oregon, we would go to potlucks, and at potlucks, people would have to put down the ingredients that they had in their dishes that they would bring, right? And so part of it is like, on one hand, it was like a safety issue for them, but also think about this, right? You ever go to somebody's house and they cook something for you, and you're like, oh, this is great. What'd you put in it? That's what we want out of the papers. That's why we want citations. We want to know what you put in it and how you put it in there. And it also kind of serves this purpose of providing a way for us to kind of think about the quality of your ingredients, because we get to see what it is. Also, a way to think about this kind of burger paper metaphor is think about the buns as the introduction and the conclusion. You want to start with an introduction. In my view, an introduction would include a thesis of some kind, a kind of statement of where the paper is going to go and why it's important. don't get too hung up on this idea of a thesis. A thesis is a basic part of communication. Like when I talk to my spouse about what movie we want to go see, I will say, I want to go see Oppenheimer because it is the best movie out there. That's my thesis. And then why? Because the director, the actors, the plot, all of that stuff, right? So you use theses all the time. And your conclusion should, there's a lot more details I could get into related to a conclusion, but a conclusion usually includes a kind of summation of what it is that you argued in the whole thing, and also kind of points, directions forward, and possibly includes something like implications. But you'll want to check with your instructor. That varies by assignment on what would necessarily be included in the conclusion, because some courses like Soc 480, those are very specific instructions about what happens in those sections. But you should have an introduction and a conclusion. If you don't have one, your paper just ends, like that's an easy place for us to take points off, and we don't want to take points off. I think of the refrigerator as the assigned materials, right? So this is the stuff you have. You don't have to go anywhere to get it. It's already around. You can see what you can put together based on what's there. I think that you always would want to use course materials. A hang up that I've noticed in some of my classes is that students will ignore all of the stuff that I've assigned and then find a couple of things or in a quick Google search and cite that is loosely around the same topic, but it is not quite the same, because I want to see what you can cook and put together with the assigned materials. Now, other papers may require outside sources, and outside sources are always a good idea if you just don't think the paper is going that well. So the library is kind of like a grocery store, but free. It's got everything that you could possibly want. It has all the stuff you could possibly need and beyond, and things you don't need as well. And so it's important to think, okay, I can't just go to the library and grab the first thing that I find, because then you're going to end up putting an apple on your burger. That's not going to work. You do have to think carefully about what are the most valid sources. Is this apple rotten or not? Or is this tomato rotten or not? Will it work out okay? Is it a tomato that is fit for human consumption? That can relate to how you think about what is a valid source. Oftentimes the peer-reviewed sources or scholarly sources are the ones that your professor might bring up, but that is also part of the process of thinking about your ingredients. Now, the main thing is that your professor is the mayor of Flavortown. They know exactly what they're after. They've written a lot of papers before. They've designed the assignment. You need to talk to them, and or TAs or writing consultants. This is an important aspect of your college career. Most professors have office hours. They are supposedly required to, and that is part of the time that you are paying for as part of your tuition. So go talk to them. But on the other hand, let's keep this in mind when you're writing a paper. Professors have to eat a lot of burgers. And so don't write papers that are generic and bland. Write papers that have a little bit of something that is going to make it stick out. It's kind of boring to read the same thing over and over. And so part of that is thinking about just in the writing process itself. If you start off with cliched statements like, in today's society, all people were created equal, like that's how some of the papers start that I've read. And so think about those ingredients that you put into your writing, and you'll be in a much better shape at being successful as a writer.